these studies in part help us to better understand if you have Hashimoto's, how at risk are you to then develop hypothyroid? Because these are separate things. Hashimoto's is, yes, the most common cause of hypothyroidism, this thyroid autoimmunity, but understanding what the likelihood of becoming hypothyroid is crucially important because, as I hope these studies will portray, all too often, healthcare providers are, I think, unintentionally, but not nevertheless, misleading healthcare consumers to believe that if they have thyroid autoimmunity, let's say Hashimoto's specifically, that their risk of developing true and full hypothyroidism is quite high. And in fact, it's the inverse. And let's go into a few studies that help us to understand this. And with that knowledge, we can intervene at the appropriate level. So the first study attempts to answer the question, what risk factors predict progression from subclinical hypothyroid to hypothyroid? So just as a reminder, SCH or subclinical hypothyroid is a condition wherein your TSH is above the cutoff, so 4.5, but it's not above 10. So you're in this subclinical range between 4.5 and 10 with your TSH, while your free T4 is still in the conventional normal range above 0.8. And you'll also see here, this is from the Tehran study group, and we've reported on data this group published a few years back that found between 9 and 19% of individuals converted from thyroid autoimmunity to hypothyroid. So this is a follow-up analysis from this same group, from the same data set, looking at 270 participants with this mildly elevated TSH, but not true hypothyroid. And so this is really important to look at what happens to this group. What is your risk? A 10-year follow-up was performed. So this is a good range. It's not a short follow-up period where we may miss individuals. And they found 40% became normal thyroid. Yay, this is good news. This should help us be a little bit anchored and not assume that if your TSH is a 5, 6, 7, that you are going to become hypothyroid. Here, what we see is 40% remain normal or became normal. 44% remained in that subclinical range, so no progression, also good news. And only 16% developed true hypothyroidism. Now, it's not to diminish hypothyroidism, but it's to help people understand that if you have this mild elevation, we don't necessarily need to intervene very aggressive gluten-free dieting, lots of supplements, what have you. We want to be preventative, yes, but also quantify the risk that, in this case, only 16% of this cohort became true hypothyroid. So it's not a guarantee. In fact, like I said a moment ago, the odds are stacked in your favor that you will not become hypothyroid. And a few other factors here that can help us predict your risk. When the TSH was over 10, there was a 5 times increased risk. And a positive TPO antibody led to a 2 times increased risk. So like we've said so many times before on the podcast, we can look at not just positive, negative, but the degree of elevation can be helpful. If your TSH is above 10 and your TPO is positive, this is predictive. Hopefully it helps us strike this balance point of, yes, we want to be preventative. And if there's a family history of hypothyroid, screening for antibodies makes sense. If the antibodies have come back positive, you can take simple preventative measures. But we also want to understand that not every positive carries the same degree of risk. And in this case, the antibodies combined with the TSH help us predict your risk and intervene accordingly. Now, here's another similar but different study examining what percentage of euthyroid or normal TSH and free T4 patients with a TPO positive progress to hypothyroidism while pregnant. And as you may know, pregnancy can be one of the factors that initiates Hashimoto's. And so now we're trying to determine how many of those women then become hypothyroid. So it's a short time window, obviously, but it can be instructive nonetheless. So here, 940 euthyroid women with TPO antibodies were assessed and broken down by those who were given placebo or levothyroxine. 7% progressed to either subclinical hypothyroidism or overt hypothyroidism. And interestingly, the use of levothyroxine did not reduce risk of progression. And as we've said before, and nice sort of carryover of concepts, higher TSH and TPO increased the risk. Just more evidence that should help us look at risk assessment for future hypothyroidism on a gradient. The higher the TSH and the higher the TPO, the higher the risk. Also bearing in mind that your risk in this one study, 7%, in the last study, 16%. So it is something, but I think hopefully refreshing news that your risk is not what I feel it often to be portrayed as 70%, 80%, 90%, more of a, you will likely become hypothyroid, and actually should be restated as you may become, but it's actually unlikely.